The first time Miles Kessler cost me $40 million, he did it by saying nothing. We were sitting across from each other in Viridian Data's conference room, 14 floors above downtown Chicago, with 6 lawyers, 4 bankers, Viridian's founder, and enough polished walnut between us to build a respectable dining room. I had just increased Asteron Systems' offer to $920 million. It was aggressive, not reckless. There was a difference, and I had spent most of my adult life making sure nobody confused the two. Viridian's founder, Lena Park, turned toward Miles. Everyone did. Northline Technologies had answered every one of our previous moves within hours, sometimes within minutes. Miles enjoyed pretending he wasn't competitive, which was one of the things I disliked most about him. The man could turn silence into a weapon and somehow make everyone else feel uncivilized for noticing. He looked down at the valuation sheet in front of him. Then he closed the folder. "No revised offer today," he said. One of his bankers shifted beside him. I watched Miles instead. He was 46, 3 years older than me, with dark hair beginning to silver at the temples and gray-blue eyes that almost never moved without purpose. His charcoal suit had no tie, because apparently, even his wardrobe knew how to look expensive, without appearing to try. Lena frowned. "Northline is standing at $880? For today." I leaned back in my chair. "Running low on conviction?" Miles finally looked at me. "No." "Cash?" "No." "Then I'm running out of theories." "That must be uncomfortable for you." Lena hid a smile. I didn't. I liked difficult people. I just preferred them working for me. The meeting ended 20 minutes later with Asteron holding the highest offer, and no indication that Northline intended to walk away. As we gathered our papers, Miles moved around the table and stopped beside me. Anyone watching would have assumed professional courtesy. "You should be careful this week, Gavin." I looked at him. "With what?" "Help you didn't ask for." Before I could answer, his general counsel called his name from the door. Miles gave me a slight nod and walked away. I stayed there with one hand on my folder. There are warnings you dismiss because they are vague. Then there are warnings delivered by the only man currently trying to take $900 million worth of technology away from you. Those deserve attention. 23 minutes later, attention became a problem. I was in the back seat of the car, heading toward Asteron's Chicago office, when an encrypted message appeared on my phone, from an address I didn't recognize. There was no greeting, no explanation, just a link and one sentence. "Northline cannot go past 960. I stared at the screen. My chief strategy officer, Hannah Cole, sat across from me, reviewing notes from the meeting. "What?" "Nothing yet." I opened the link. Inside the isolated environment our security team used for unknown files, 3 documents appeared. The first was a Northline internal financing summary. The second was a lender sensitivity model. The third contained a discussion of Northline's acquisition limits, $960 million. If the documents were genuine, I had just been handed the single most valuable piece of information in the Viridian process. I also had no legitimate reason to possess it. "Hannah." She looked up. I turned the phone toward her without forwarding the files. Her expression changed immediately. "Where did you get that?" "Anonymous." "Could be fake." "Could be." She read another line, then another. "It doesn't look fake." "No." Neither of us spoke for a moment. If Northline's ceiling was truly 960, Asteron could shape every remaining bid around it. We could push Miles toward his financing limit and force him either to drop out or exceed what his board had authorized. In acquisition terms, someone had handed me the other player's cards while he was still deciding whether to raise. Hannah looked at me. "What do you want to do?" "Quarantine it." "All of it?" "All of it. Send the address and metadata to legal and security. Nobody opens these outside the clean environment. Nobody discusses the figures with the deal team." She nodded. "And our next offer? Pretend I never saw this." She studied me for half a second longer than necessary. "Even if it's real?" "Especially if it's real." I locked the phone. Winning mattered to me. That was not a secret, but I wanted to know I had won. There was no satisfaction in reaching the finish line after someone quietly moved it closer while the other runner wasn't looking. By 4 that afternoon, our general counsel confirmed that at least one of the documents contained formatting, terminology, and lender references consistent with authentic Northline material. He couldn't confirm the numbers. He didn't need to. The breach itself was enough. I ordered an internal audit of every contact between Asteron employees, outside advisors, Viridian representatives, and anyone connected to Northline. The obvious theory was that someone at Northline had leaked its own information to manipulate my bidding. The less obvious theory was that someone wanted me to believe that. Neither explained Miles's warning. At 6:15, I found him in the lobby of the Langham. There was an industry dinner upstairs. Half the people involved in the Viridian deal would be attending, which meant no one there would admit they were thinking about the Viridian deal. Miles stood near the elevators speaking with one of his executives. When he saw me, he finished the conversation and waited. That annoyed me more than if he'd walked away. I stopped in front of him. "You told me to watch for help." "I did." "Why?" "Good evening to you too. Did you know I was going to receive something?" His expression barely changed, but it changed. That was enough. "What did you receive?" he asked. I smiled without humor. That sounded suspiciously like a question you already know the answer to. "Then don't answer it. Did it come from you?" "No." "Your people?" "Not with my authorization." That qualification is doing a lot of work. It's doing exactly the work it needs to. The elevator behind him opened. Neither of us moved. Miles lowered his voice. "If information arrives in the middle of a transaction and makes your next decision easier, ask yourself who benefits from you making that decision." "You?" "Possibly." I studied him. "You're remarkably relaxed for a man whose confidential information may have been compromised." Something passed across his face. Not surprise. Recognition. I felt the first real shift in my thinking. "You already knew." Miles held my gaze. "I know the process is no longer clean." "How?" "I'm not discussing an active investigation in a hotel lobby." "Northline investigation?" He stepped into the elevator. I followed before the doors could close. His mouth moved slightly. "Are you following me now? We're going to the same dinner. You weren't 30 seconds ago." I changed my mind. "That fast? I'm flexible. That isn't what people say about you." The doors closed. For 10 floors, neither of us spoke. Then Miles said, "Don't use what you were sent." I turned toward him. "You don't know what I was sent." "No." "You don't know whether it's genuine." "No." "You don't even know if it helps me." This time, he looked directly at me. "Does it?" The elevator opened. Miles walked out before I answered. I skipped the dinner. By 9, Hannah and our security team had enough preliminary results to make my office feel 10 degrees colder. The leak wasn't one way. Someone connected to Northline had received confidential information concerning Asteron's bid authority. Not public estimates, not analyst speculation, our actual maximum authorized ceiling. I stared at the access log on the screen. Who saw this? Hannah had lost all trace of her usual calm. Inside Asteron? You. Me. Finance. Legal. 3 members of the board transaction committee. And outside? Our acquisition counsel and primary lender. When did Northline get it? She hesitated. Hannah. Almost 2 weeks ago. I looked at her. 2 weeks. Miles had known how far I could go before 3 separate rounds of bidding. I remembered every Northline offer during that period. Every delay. Every time Miles had allowed Asteron to lead when he could have pushed us higher. "Get me Northline's offer history." I already did. She slid the report across the desk. I read it once, then again. If Miles had known my ceiling, the rational move was obvious. Keep bidding until I approached it. Make me stretch. Make the board nervous. Make Asteron pay more even if Northline eventually lost. But Miles hadn't done that. He had stopped early. Repeatedly. 40 million below where he could have pushed me in the last round alone. For the first time since the Viridian process began, I wasn't wondering how Miles Kessler planned to beat me. I was wondering why a man who knew exactly how far I could be pushed had chosen not to push at all. I called him at 7 the next morning. He answered on the 3rd ring. "You sleep?" "No." "That tracks." "Your concern is touching." "It wasn't concern. You sound unpleasant when you're tired." "I'm pleasant now?" "No." I looked through the glass wall of my office, at a floor full of people, pretending not to notice that our acquisition had become an internal security problem. "I know you had my ceiling." A pause. Not surprise. Not denial. Then Miles said, "Where are you?" "My office." "Who's with you?" "No one." "Keep it that way." My grip tightened around the phone. That sounded remarkably close to an instruction. It was. "I don't take instructions from you." "I know." It's one of your defining features. Then try again. Another pause. Please keep it that way. It should not have made a difference. It did. Did you have it? Yes. The answer landed harder than I expected, even though I already knew. When? 13 days ago. Before the second round. Yes. You knew my maximum. Yes. And you said nothing. Yes. Every answer was calm. Clean. Impossible to misunderstand. I stood and walked toward the windows. Chicago looked bright and cold below me. Did you use it? No. You expect me to take your word for that? No. That stopped me. Miles continued. My general counsel documented receipt within 20 minutes. The file was isolated. Everyone who had access was removed from pricing discussions until we could confirm they hadn't used it. We built the last 3 offers from a clean team. You have records? Yes. Send them. I can show them to you. That's not what I said. I'm not transmitting privileged internal records to the CEO of a competing bidder. I closed my eyes. Of course he wasn't. Where? Neutral counsel's office. 11. I'll be there. Bring your general counsel. No. Gavin. If I bring legal, this becomes a formal exchange before I know what I'm looking at. Which is why you should bring legal. I'll bring Hannah. Another pause. You trust her? Yes. You answered too quickly. Goodbye, Miles. 11. He disconnected first. I hated that. At 11:12, I was sitting in a small conference room, belonging to an outside firm, neither Asteron nor Northline used regularly. Miles arrived with 1 attorney and no entourage. I brought Hannah, 4 people, no bankers, no acquisition teams, no assistants offering coffee. The smaller room changed something. Miles was still my rival. He just looked more like a man than an institution. His attorney opened a laptop and walked us through the record. Timestamp of receipt. Internal notification. Access restrictions. Removal of 2 Northline employees from pricing discussions because they had opened the leaked material before legal could quarantine it. A written instruction from Miles himself. No strategic decision may rely directly or indirectly on the unauthorized Asteron information. I read the line twice. Hannah asked his attorney a question about internal controls. I barely heard the answer. The rational part of me was checking for gaps. The less rational part kept returning to one fact. Miles could have hurt me. Not vaguely. Not theoretically. He had been handed the exact number that defined the boundary of my board's confidence in me. He could have used it to push Asteron until I either overpaid or publicly retreated. Instead, he had handicapped his own team. When the attorney finished, I looked at Miles. Why? His expression didn't change. You know why? No, I know what you did. Same reason you quarantined the Northline files. I leaned back. You didn't know I would. I hoped you would. And if I hadn't, I would have adjusted. How? That would have depended on what you did. That's not an answer. It's the answer you're getting. There it was again. The calm wall. I felt irritation return, which was almost a relief. Why didn't you tell me? His attorney looked at him. Miles closed the laptop himself. Because the second I told you someone had leaked your ceiling, I would have changed your behavior. My behavior had already been changed. I was bidding against someone who knew my limit. You were bidding against someone who wasn't using it. That distinction mattered to you. Yes. It would have mattered to me too. I know. Apparently not enough. Hannah glanced between us. I ignored her. Miles folded his hands on the table. If I had called you 13 days ago and said someone inside your transaction had compromised your bid authority, what would you have done? Investigated. And during the investigation? Adjusted access. Your board would have known. Probably. Would you have changed your bid strategy? I didn't answer. Miles nodded once. Exactly. That was my decision to make. Yes. The answer came too quickly. I stared at him. He looked away for the first time since the conversation started. Then he said, more quietly, I know. Something about that changed the room more than an argument would have. Not an apology. Not quite. Recognition. I said, you decided I was better off not knowing. I decided I wasn't entitled to alter your side of an active transaction. Those aren't the same thing. No. Do you see that? Yes. Did you see it 13 days ago? Miles met my eyes. No. The honesty unsettled me more than defensiveness would have. I had built an entire version of Miles Kessler in my head over the years. Ruthless when necessary. elegant about it. Patient, because patience gave him leverage. The kind of man who would let someone else exhaust themselves and then walk in at the end without wrinkling his shirt. That man was easy to compete with. This one was harder. Hannah broke the tension. We have a larger problem. She turned her laptop toward us. Our internal review narrowed the access window. Miles's attention shifted instantly. Where? Executive finance, legal, board transaction committee. His attorney sat forward. Any external advisors? Possible, but less likely. The document Northline received was generated after lender review. Distribution was limited. I looked at Hannah. How limited? 8 people. I knew every one of them. That was the first moment the breach stopped feeling corporate. 8 people. People who had sat in my office. People who had argued budgets with me, celebrated earnings with me, complained about flights, attended holiday dinners. People who had watched me build Asteron for 17 years. Miles asked, "Does anyone on that list benefit from forcing the valuation higher?" I looked at him. Everyone benefits if we win. That wasn't my question. I knew. I didn't like where it pointed. If Asteron overpays, Hannah said slowly, there would be pressure for tighter board control. Miles did not respond. He didn't need to. I did. Richard. Hannah's eyes moved to me. Maybe. Richard Sloan had chaired our board for 9 years. Before that, he had been one of the first investors willing to take me seriously when Asteron was 14 people above a printing company in Boston. He had defended me during our worst quarter. He had once told a room full of investors that I was difficult because easy men rarely built difficult things. I had believed him. "Do not put his name in writing yet," I said. Hannah nodded. Miles said nothing. That irritated me. "You have a thought." "Several. Pick one." "I don't know enough." "You usually don't let that stop you." A faint smile appeared. "There he is." "Who?" "The man I expected this morning." I'm glad the experience is becoming familiar again. It was getting unsettling. Hannah gave me a look that said she was absolutely going to ask about this later. I ignored that too. For the next 2 hours, we worked through access pathways without discussing a single active bid number. That boundary mattered. Whenever conversation drifted near pricing, Miles stopped it. Once, I did. Neither of us commented. It was the strangest collaboration I had ever experienced. We were helping each other identify whoever had corrupted the process, while still actively trying to beat each other in the process itself. At one point, Hannah and Miles's attorney stepped out to verify a contact record. That left the two of us alone. Miles seemed perfectly comfortable with the quiet. I reached for the water bottle near my elbow. "You do this on purpose." "What?" "Nothing." He looked amused. "You'll have to narrow that down." The silence. "You fill it." "Because someone has to." "No one has to." I took a drink. "That sounds inefficient." "Not everything needs to produce something." "That sounds like a sentence you practice for interviews." He laughed. Actually laughed. It surprised me enough that I smiled before I could stop myself. Miles noticed. Of course he did. His expression softened slightly. "You know what your problem is? I assume you've prepared a list. You treat uncertainty like a hostile takeover. I treat uncertainty like uncertainty. No. You interrogate it until it gives you something useful. That strategy has served me well. In business." The last 2 words landed differently. I set the bottle down. "What happened?" He knew what I meant. His gaze dropped to the table. "I was with someone for 6 years. I waited. He used to tell me I solved problems before he'd decided whether they were problems. I'm guessing you disagreed. For a long time. And later, I thought I was protecting him. See the risk first. Remove it before it reaches him." Miles looked at me again. Eventually he stopped telling me things because every truth became something I managed. There was no bitterness in his voice. That made it feel more intimate. "Did you love him?" "Yes." "Was that enough?" "No." I looked at the space between our hands. "So now you don't intervene." "I try not to." "You withheld information that directly concerned me for 13 days. His mouth tightened. "Yes. That's intervention, Miles. I'm aware." "No. That's the interesting part. I don't think you were." He watched me. For once, he had no response ready. Hannah and the attorney returned before either of us could say more. By late afternoon, the 4 of us had narrowed the breach further. No proof, but enough shape to make me uncomfortable. Someone with high-level Asteron access had deliberately sent my ceiling outward. Whoever it was had probably expected Miles to use it. As we gathered our files, Hannah left first to take a call. Miles's attorney followed. I stood beside the conference table, suddenly reluctant to move. Miles closed his folder. "Did you ever let anyone see you before you know what you're going to do?" I looked at him. "That's an oddly personal question." "Yes. You're asking it anyway." "Yes." I considered deflecting. It would have been easy. Instead I said, "Not someone sitting across from me." Miles glanced down at the documents, the laptops, the polished table between us, then back at me. "That's what I thought." I picked up my coat and walked out. Halfway to the elevator, I realized with irritating clarity that I didn't want the conversation to be over. At 8:40 the next morning, I sent Miles a message containing a question I already knew could wait until afternoon. "Do you recognize an advisory firm called Hale Mercer?" His reply came 4 minutes later. "Yes." "Why?" "One of their partners appears twice in the contact records." That was true. It was also not urgent. Miles called instead of replying. "What did you find?" I swiveled away from my computer. "Good morning. You hate small talk." "I'm experimenting with personal growth." "That sounds dangerous." I smiled despite myself. Hale Mercer consulted for Richard 3 years ago. Nothing current that I can prove. "Send the public records. You could retrieve them yourself." I could. Neither of us said the obvious thing. I had contacted him because I wanted to. "I'll be at the neutral office at 6, he said. "We don't have anything scheduled." "We do now." He disconnected. I stared at my phone for a moment. Then Hannah appeared in my doorway. She had perfected the ability to enter my office with the expression of someone who had already decided I was wrong. "You called Kessler. How would you know that?" "You look less homicidal." "I'm terminating your access to executive observation. You should put that in writing." She set a file on my desk. "We found something." The humor disappeared. Richard Sloan had approved Hale Mercer for an unrelated strategic review 18 months earlier. That alone meant nothing. What mattered was the consultant attached to the project, Eric Vaughn. Vaughn had communicated twice with a Viridian intermediary during the current acquisition window. There was still no direct line from Richard to the leak, but the circle was narrowing. At 6, I arrived at the neutral office before Miles. I told myself that mattered. He walked in 3 minutes later, carrying one folder and no lawyer. "You're alone," I said. "So are you." Hannah had another meeting. My counsel had a life. That must be inconvenient. Constantly. He sat across from me. Same table, same polished surface. Except this time there were no attorneys, no assistants, no legal pads arranged like defensive walls. I slid the Hale Mercer material toward him. He read without speaking. I watched him do it. That was becoming a problem. Miles was attractive in a way I had managed for years to classify as irrelevant. Plenty of men were attractive. Most became less interesting as soon as they started talking. Miles had developed the opposite problem. Every conversation made him harder to reduce. He finished the last page. "This gets you closer to Richard. It gets me closer to someone Richard once hired. You're protecting him." "I'm refusing to accuse a man based on proximity. Those aren't mutually exclusive." I leaned back. "You sound like me." "I'll recover." He pushed the file toward me. "What did Richard do for you?" The question irritated me, because I understood why he was asking it. He backed Asteron before anyone knew what Asteron was. "That isn't what I asked." "He gave us capital." "Still not what I asked." I looked at him. Miles waited. I hated how good he was at that. "He believed me," I said finally. Miles didn't move. When we were starting out, I was 30 years old, and very good at making rooms full of experienced men dislike me. Richard told me that being easy to like wasn't the same as being worth following. You remembered that. Obviously. You remember everything anyone says when it gives you permission to become harder. That hit with enough precision that I almost laughed. Instead I said, "You enjoy this." "What?" "Diagnosing me." "I'm not diagnosing you. You've been doing it for 2 days. I'm asking questions. Same thing with better manners." His mouth curved. I looked away. Outside the conference room windows, the offices had emptied. The city beyond them had gone from steel gray to scattered lights. Miles closed the folder. "What happened with the partner who almost took control of Asteron?" I looked back at him. "I didn't tell you about that." "No." "Then how do you know?" "You've mentioned it publicly." "Not the details." I considered refusing. Then I remembered his question from the previous afternoon. Do you ever let anyone see you before you know what you're going to do? I had spent most of the day thinking about it. His name was Peter, I said. He was our chief operating officer. We built the first version of Asteron together. Miles waited. We needed financing for an expansion. And he thought I was moving too slowly, so he negotiated separately with an investor group. To replace you? Not exactly. To dilute my control enough that I couldn't block the deal. Did he think he was protecting the company? Yes. The word came out sharper than I intended. Miles noticed. He said I was too emotionally attached to staying independent, that I was making decisions based on fear. Was he right? I stared at him. About the fear? Yes. I could have lied. Instead I said, probably. Miles nodded, and that still didn't give him the right. No. The answer came immediately. Something inside me loosened, not because he agreed with me, because he understood the distinction. I said, after that, I made sure nobody could ever know enough about what I needed to corner me again. Miles was quiet. That sounds lonely. It sounds effective. Those aren't mutually exclusive either. I laughed softly. There. You did it again. What? Made an observation sound like an accusation. I wasn't accusing you. No? No. His voice lowered. I was wondering whether becoming impossible to betray also made you impossible to know. The room went very still. There are people who get close by asking permission. Miles had a more dangerous method. He told the truth and waited to see whether you left. I stood, not because I wanted to leave, because sitting across from him had suddenly become unbearable. Miles watched me walk around the table. His expression changed when I stopped beside him. Not fear, awareness. Gavin. I had spent the last 48 hours analyzing him, his motives, his decisions, his restraint. For once, I did not want more information. I put one hand against the edge of the table beside him and bent down. I gave him enough time to move away. He didn't. I kissed him. Miles went completely still for perhaps half a second. Then his hand came up to the side of my neck and he kissed me back. Not cautiously, not competitively. Nothing about it felt like winning. That was probably why it affected me so much. When I pulled away, there were only inches between us. We were both breathing harder than the situation justified. His hand dropped. Well, he said. I laughed once. That's your response? I had a better one before you did that. What happened to it? You did that. I kissed him again. Shorter this time. Deliberate. When I stepped back, Miles stayed seated for another second, looking up at me with an expression I had never seen across any negotiation table. Then he stood. We need to stop. The warmth disappeared from my body so quickly it was almost impressive. I see. That isn't what I mean. Then choose more accurate words. His eyes narrowed. This is exactly why we need to stop. Because I prefer clarity? Because tomorrow I may make a decision that costs you Viridian, and you may make one that costs Northline $50 million. Neither of us should have to wonder whether this changed the other decision. I looked at him. That kiss didn't compromise my ability to run a company. I didn't say it did. You're treating it like a conflict. It is a conflict, only if we let it become one. And how do we know whether we did? I opened my mouth. Nothing came. Miles softened. I want this. That was worse. He continued. I'm not pretending otherwise. But while our companies are bidding against each other, I need to know that when you hurt me professionally, it's because you believed it was right for Asteron, not because of this. And you deserve the same. I hated how reasonable he was. You're very difficult to argue with when you stop being annoying. Don't worry, it won't last. My phone rang. Hannah, I answered. Tell me. Her voice was tight. We got the authorization trail. I turned away from Miles. For Vaughn? Yes. The Hale Mercer work wasn't dormant. Richard reopened the engagement 6 weeks ago through a board advisory budget. My stomach went cold. Purpose? Strategic governance review. Who signed it? Richard. I closed my eyes. There was more. I could hear it in her hesitation. What else? We recovered a scheduling record. Vaughn met the intermediary who transmitted your sealing the day before Northline received it. Miles could hear only my side of the call, but he understood enough. I said, do not contact Richard. Do not contact the board. Lock the records and send copies to outside counsel. Already done. I'll call you. I ended the call. Miles watched me. It's him? I don't have the final proof. But you believe it. I picked up my coat. Richard was at Asteron's headquarters. I knew, because we had a board committee meeting scheduled for 8 the next morning, and he always arrived the night before. Miles stepped toward me. What are you going to do? I'm going to ask him. Tonight? Yes. That may give him time to destroy evidence. Our outside counsel already has copies. Miles nodded. He understood. An hour later, Richard was sitting in my office, looking older than he had that morning. I put the authorization record in front of him. He read it, then removed his glasses. You weren't supposed to find this yet. I stared at him. Not denial. Some small part of me had still wanted denial. Why? Richard looked toward the windows. Because you were going to buy Viridian at any price, if Kessler kept pushing. That was my decision. It was becoming Asteron's problem. So you handed him my ceiling? I gave someone enough information to create pressure. You gave my competitor the exact limit of my authority. I expected Northline to force you higher. The board would have stopped you. You wanted me to fail. I wanted you to understand that this company cannot remain an extension of your fear. The words landed because they were cruel and because they were not entirely false. Richard leaned forward. You built Asteron, Gavin, but you've spent 10 years making sure no one can make a meaningful decision without you. Viridian was going to magnify that. You could have told me. I have. No. You argued with me. That isn't the same thing as manipulating a transaction behind my back. His expression tightened. You wouldn't listen. I almost laughed. Peter had said the same thing. Different decade. Same justification. I stood. You're done for tonight. Gavin, leave. He did. By midnight, I knew the choices in front of me. I could keep the breach contained, remove Richard quietly, and continue bidding. Or I could disclose that Asteron's own board chair had corrupted an active acquisition process. That could end our bid. It could end my control of the company. It might even end my job. At 12:17, I called Miles. He answered immediately. I know it was Richard. A beat. What are you going to do? I looked at the reporting documents open on my desk. Tell me what you would do. Miles was quiet long enough that I knew he understood exactly what I was asking. Then he said, no. Anger rose instantly. No? You have spent half your life making sure no one decides for you. Miles, I won't become another man who does. The line went quiet. For the first time in years, there was no opponent left to argue with. Only a decision that belonged entirely to me. By 6 the next morning, the decision had stopped feeling complicated. Not easier, just mine. I called outside counsel first, then Hannah, then the chair of the audit committee. At 7:15, I signed the disclosure, authorizing Asteron to report the breach formally to Viridian and to every party whose information had been compromised. At 7:23, I withdrew our acquisition bid. No speech, no dramatic declaration, just my signature at the bottom of a document that ended 9 months of work. Hannah stood across from my desk while the confirmation went through. You're sure? No. She waited. I looked at the screen. That's different from being wrong. She gave one small nod. The first calls started 3 minutes later. By 8, our board had convened an emergency session. By 8:30, Richard had retained counsel. By 9, someone had leaked enough of the situation to a financial reporter that Asteron's stock opened down 7%. The market does not reward moral clarity. It rewards predictability. That morning, I had given it neither. The board meeting lasted 3 hours. Richard joined remotely on advice of counsel. He did not deny authorizing Hale Mercer. He disputed only the conclusion that he had intended to compromise the acquisition. His argument was careful. He had initiated a governance review. A consultant had exceeded his mandate. Any transmission of confidential bid information had occurred without his knowledge. It was almost plausible. That was what made Richard dangerous. He had spent his career learning how to move responsibility one sentence away from himself. I listened. For once, I did not interrupt. When he finished, one director asked me why I had withdrawn before the investigation concluded. Every instinct I had told me to defend the decision aggressively. Instead, I said, because I could no longer represent to Viridian that our bid process was clean. That may have cost us the transaction, yes, and possibly hundreds of millions in long-term value, yes. Richard's face appeared on the monitor. This is exactly what I was concerned about. Gavin makes irreversible decisions alone, then calls it leadership. There it was. The accusation I had spent years making sure no one could use against me. The worst part was that some of it was true. I looked at the directors around the table. I made the withdrawal because there wasn't time to convene the board before the next bidding deadline. Richard leaned toward his camera. That's always the explanation. I kept my voice level. You're right about one thing. The room went quiet. Richard did too. Asteron depends too heavily on me. Hannah, seated against the wall, looked up. I built systems around speed. Over time, speed became concentration. Too much information comes to me. Too many decisions wait for me. That is a governance problem. Richard's expression changed. Not victory, uncertainty. I continued. But identifying a flaw in my leadership did not give anyone the right to manipulate an acquisition to force a correction. No one spoke. The board should investigate both issues. Richard stared at me through the screen. You're proposing a review of your own authority. Yes. He looked almost disappointed. He had expected resistance. Probably because I had trained him to. The meeting adjourned with the audit committee taking control of the investigation. I walked back to my office, feeling as if someone had removed part of the building while I was still standing in it. Asteron was no longer bidding for Viridian. Richard was no longer someone I trusted. Miles Kessler had become the one person I wanted to call. I didn't. At 11:40, my phone rang. His name appeared on the screen. I answered. Hi. A pause. Miles said, You withdrew. News traveled quickly. Yes. Are you all right? I almost told him I was fine. The answer formed automatically. Then I stopped. No. His voice softened. Do you want me to come over? The question surprised me. Not because he offered. Because he asked. I sat down. Yes. All right. He arrived 40 minutes later. No assistant. No attorney. No Northline people waiting downstairs. I met him in a small conference room, away from the executive floor. He looked at me for several seconds before sitting. No table full of documents this time, just 2 glasses of water someone had left earlier. You reported everything? He asked. Yes. And Richard? Under investigation. What about you? Also apparently. Miles frowned. I proposed a governance review. His expression sharpened. Why? Because Richard was wrong about what he did. He wasn't entirely wrong about me. Miles considered that. You want me to say I'm impressed? I was hoping you'd resist. I'm trying. That sounds painful. It is. For a moment, the air between us felt almost normal. Then I said, Asteron is out. I know. So there's no longer a conflict. Miles looked at me. There was something in his expression I couldn't place. My body understood it before my mind did. You're still bidding. Yes. The word landed quietly. That made it worse. How far along? Northline submitted a revised offer this morning. I stood, not dramatically. I simply could not stay seated. Miles watched me. You came here knowing that. Yes. And you still asked if I wanted you here. Yes. I crossed to the window. I wanted to be angry for a simple reason. Simple anger is useful. This wasn't simple. You have a clear path now. Not clear. Better. Because I withdrew. Yes. He did not soften the truth. I turned around. Are you going to buy Viridian? If our board approves the final terms. Yes. I stared at him. Some irrational part of me had assumed that when I stepped away, he would too. Not because he had promised. Not because it made business sense. Because I had given up the thing we had been fighting over, and somewhere inside me, I had turned that into a test, without ever telling him there was one. Miles stood. Gavin. What? I know what this feels like. No. You know what it looks like. His jaw tightened. Then tell me. You get the company. Yes. I get a board investigation. Yes. You spend 2 weeks protecting my ability to compete fairly. Then the moment I stop competing, you take the advantage. That isn't what happened. I know. The words came out too quickly. Miles went still. I looked away. That's the problem. He waited. I hated that he always did that. I know you didn't engineer this. I know you didn't ask me to withdraw. I know Northline has employees and investors and obligations that have nothing to do with us. Yes, and I still hate that you're doing it. His face softened. I understand. Don't. All right. I rubbed one hand over my mouth. If you walked away from Viridian now, What would happen? Miles understood the question. Northline would lose a strategic asset we've pursued for nearly a year. Our board would want an explanation. Viridian would likely reopen discussions with another buyer. Several hundred employees would be affected by the delay. So you won't? No. There was the answer. Clean, honest, painful. I looked at him. Even for me. His expression changed. That is not a fair way to frame it. No, no. If I sacrifice Northline's interests to prove I care about you, then every person who depends on my judgment becomes part of our relationship without consenting to it. I knew he was right. I resented him for being right. Miles stepped closer, then stopped before entering my space. I care about you. My throat tightened. But I won't make thousands of people absorb the cost of demonstrating it. I laughed once. Very romantic. No. His voice was quiet. But true. That hurt more. I had always assumed betrayal came from dishonesty. Peter had lied. Richard had manipulated. This was different. Miles was telling me exactly what he intended to do, and I still felt abandoned. I need some distance. The words surprised both of us. Miles did not ask how much. He did not argue. He did not tell me I was reacting emotionally. He simply nodded. All right. That immediate acceptance cut deeper than resistance would have. You're not going to fight me on it? You asked for distance. Yes, I heard you. There were a dozen things I wanted him to do. Contradict me. Make me reconsider. Tell me I was being unreasonable, and stay anyway. Instead, he picked up his coat. At the door, he stopped. I'm not disappearing, Gavin. I said nothing, but I am going to respect what you asked for. Then he left. For the next 6 days, Miles did exactly that. No calls, no messages, no carefully timed encounters, no attempt to reach me through Hannah. Nothing. Meanwhile, Asteron's board investigation expanded. Richard's explanations began collapsing under email records and consultant invoices, and Northline kept negotiating with Viridian. I watched the updates because pretending I didn't care would have been insulting even to myself. On the 6th evening, just after 7, a market alert appeared on my screen. Northline Technologies had signed a definitive agreement to acquire Viridian data. I stared at the headline. The deal I had spent 9 months pursuing belonged to Miles. Pain arrived first. Sharp. Immediate. Then, something else. I opened the transaction summary. Northline's final price was lower than Asteron's last offer. Miles could have used our internal chaos to bid aggressively. He hadn't. He could have pressured Viridian while my board was distracted. He hadn't. He had taken exactly the path he said he would take. Nothing more. Nothing hidden. For the first time since I asked him to stay away, I wondered whether Miles's silence meant something very different from abandonment. By Monday morning, the question was no longer whether Richard had crossed a line. It was how many people he had convinced himself he was helping when he crossed it. The audit committee had recovered enough email traffic to reconstruct the sequence. Richard had reopened the Hale Mercer engagement, asked for an analysis of Asteron's governance exposure during the Viridian acquisition, and given Eric Vaughn access to information he never should have seen. There was no email saying, "Send Gavin's ceiling to Northline." Men like Richard were smarter than that. There were suggestions, questions, phrases like, "Competitive pressure may reveal decision weakness." One message bothered me more than the others. Gavin responds best when options become limited. I read that sentence 3 times, then I closed the file. For most of my career, I had believed control protected me from betrayal. Richard had believed restricting my options would protect Asteron from me. Miles had believed withholding information would protect my ability to choose freely. Different men, different intentions, same mistake. They had all decided privately what I should be allowed to know or choose. The uncomfortable difference was that one of them had finally stopped. The board met Tuesday afternoon. Richard attended in person this time. He looked tired, but still composed. I had once admired that about him. Now I understood composure could simply mean a man had rehearsed his justification longer than everyone else. The audit committee presented its findings. Richard listened without interruption. When they finished, he looked at me. "You've already decided what you want." 6 weeks earlier, I would have answered immediately. Instead, I said, "This isn't mine to decide alone." His expression shifted. The committee chair glanced toward me. I continued, "I'm recusing myself from the recommendation regarding Richard's board position." Richard frowned. You're letting them remove me. No, I looked around the table. I'm letting the board do its job. That distinction mattered more than I expected. The discussion lasted another hour. When the vote came, Richard was removed as chair and asked to resign from the board entirely. He did not look at me while the secretary recorded it. Afterward, he waited until everyone else had left. You think this proves something? He asked. No. You think distributing authority suddenly makes you enlightened? No. He gave a bitter laugh. At least you're consistent. I'm trying not to be. That silenced him. I stood at the far end of the table. For years, this room had been where I defended my decisions. Now the documents in front of me contained proposals I had written with the governance committee, clearer delegation thresholds, independent approval for acquisitions above a certain scale, stronger limits on founder override authority. Changes I would have fought 6 months earlier. Richard looked at the papers. You're giving up power. I'm giving up unnecessary dependence on me. That sounds like the same thing. It used to. He studied me. Then, for the first time since the investigation began, some of the anger left his face. I did believe I was protecting the company. I believe you. That surprised him. It did not change my answer. Believing that doesn't make what you did acceptable. Richard nodded slowly. Understanding someone's motive did not erase the damage. Love did not erase it either. Richard left. I stayed in the boardroom alone for several minutes. Then I checked my phone. Nothing from Miles. Of course there wasn't. I had asked him for distance. He had believed me. That realization had been following me for days, becoming harder to avoid. I had spent the first 43 years of my life judging loyalty through action. Who stayed? Who fought? Who intervened? Who chose my side? When Miles continued the Viridian deal, I had taken his refusal to sacrifice Northline as evidence that I mattered less. When he respected my request for distance, some part of me had taken that as evidence too. But I had created an impossible test. Fight me when I ask you not to, or prove you don't care. Give up your company's interests for me, or prove I come second. Read my mind correctly, then call it love. Richard had manipulated me because he believed he knew what Asteron needed. Miles had once withheld information because he believed he knew what respect required. And I had been quietly demanding that Miles ignore my own words because I believed I knew what love should look like. I called Hannah. She answered immediately. Is the building on fire? No. Then why are you calling after 6? I'm improving as a person. Oh God. I smiled. Do we have anything tomorrow night? We? Asteron. Nothing you can't move. Move it. A pause. Should I ask why? No. Is this Kessler? Good night, Hannah. Her laugh followed me as I hung up. Northline had officially completed the Viridian acquisition that morning. The competition was over. Miles had won. For once, I could go to him without a number hiding underneath the conversation. He was still at Northline's office when I arrived shortly after 7. His assistant recognized me and raised both eyebrows. I don't have an appointment, I assumed. Is he here? She looked toward his closed door. He is. Can you tell him I'd like 5 minutes? She studied me. Only 5? That depends on him. That sounds like negotiation. I'm working on that. A few seconds later, Miles opened the door himself. He stopped when he saw me. For the first time since I had known him, Miles Kessler looked completely unprepared. I liked it more than I should have. Hi, I said. Hi, can I come in? He stepped aside. His office was quieter than mine. Fewer screens, fewer documents visible. The Viridian closing binder sat on one corner of his desk. I noticed it. Miles noticed me noticing. I can put that away. No. I looked at him. Congratulations. His expression became cautious. Thank you. I still hate that you got it. I assumed. I may hate it for several years. That feels conservative. I almost smiled. Then I remembered why I was there. I was unfair to you. Miles leaned against the edge of his desk. You were hurt. Both can be true. He said nothing. I took a breath. You shouldn't have kept the leak from me. No. You don't get to protect me with information I don't know exists. I understand that now. Do you? Yes. There was no defensive explanation. No argument about intention. I continued. But when I asked you for distance, you gave it to me. Yes. And I spent almost a week being angry that you did. Something softened in his face. I suspected that might happen. That sentence is dangerously close to ruining this. His mouth twitched. Sorry. You should be. This time, when quiet settled between us, I let it exist. Miles noticed. That irritated me less than it used to. I kept waiting for you to do something, I said. What? I didn't know. Call. Show up. Find some way around what I asked for. I thought about it. My chest tightened. What stopped you? You. One word. That was enough. Miles straightened. You told me what you needed. I decided believing you mattered more than proving I cared. I looked away for a moment. There it was. The thing I had been unable to understand because it looked too much like absence. Miles stepped closer, but stopped several feet away. I still got something wrong. What? When I received your sealing, I told myself not interfering meant respecting your agency. He shook his head. But I had already decided which information you could handle, without changing your choices. That was still control, just quieter. I looked at him. I don't want to do that to you again, he said. Then he asked the question I had spent most of my life avoiding. What do you need from me? My first instinct was to ask what he meant. My second was to make a joke. I did neither. When something concerns me, tell me. He waited. Even if you think knowing it will complicate my decision. All right. If our companies end up on opposite sides of something again, tell me when the professional obligation becomes personal risk. All right. And don't give up your company to prove you love me. Miles's eyes changed. I forced myself to continue. I'm serious. So am I. I may still hate your decisions. You almost certainly will. I need to be allowed to hate them without either of us treating that as the end. Miles nodded. Then he said, I need something too. Go ahead. You cannot make every decision I make independently into evidence about how much I care about you. That one hurt. Which usually meant it deserved attention. I nodded. Fair. And if you need distance, I will believe you. That feels unnecessarily pointed. It is. Fine. And one more. I raised an eyebrow. You don't get to kiss me, disappear into a governance crisis, and then arrive in my office expecting me to remain calm. Despite everything, I laughed. That sounds less like a boundary. It's a complaint. I can work with complaints. Miles smiled. Then the smile faded. What are we doing, Gavin? For once, I did not analyze possible answers. I want to be with you. His gaze stayed on mine. Even when Northline competes with Asteron? Yes. Even when I win? Let's not become unrealistic. He laughed. I crossed the distance between us. This time, there was no acquisition to compromise. No board decision waiting. No secret information inside either man's pocket. Miles reached for me, only after I was already moving toward him. I kissed him, and when he kissed me back, nothing about it felt like surrender. Several weeks later, we had dinner at a small restaurant neither of us had chosen, for strategic reasons. Asteron was still Asteron. Northline was still Northline. Viridian still belonged to Miles. I still disliked that. Our companies had already ended up competing for another enterprise contract, which Hannah described as proof the universe had a sense of humor. Miles sat across from me. Between us was an empty table. No laptops, no bankers, no valuation sheets, not even our phones. He looked down at the empty space, then back at me. Are we negotiating? I thought about 17 years of building a company around the belief that the safest position was the one where no one else held leverage. Then I looked at the man across from me. Not tonight. And for once, I meant it.